From the very moment Susan Dey stepped onto television screens in 1970 as Laurie Partridge, something curious happened. America didn't just notice her, they paused. Her porcelain skin, the cool calm in her eyes, and a stillness that felt almost otherworldly, but the smile that seemed so camera-perfect concealed something no script could touch, a life that was never quite what it appeared to be. While millions saw a rising star behind the trailers and away from the stage lights, Susan was quietly fighting a battle of her own against fame, against expectations, and, at times, against herself. She didn't play the fame game, she didn't chase spotlights or sell tabloid exclusives. In fact, she walked away. Without a scandal, without fanfare, she simply disappeared, leaving a trail of half-told stories, unanswered questions, and a silence louder than any headline. In a world obsessed with overexposure, Susan Dey did the impossible. She vanished before anyone could see all of her. But now, for the first time, let's look beyond the myth and into the woman Hollywood never truly understood. It began with a casting call that shouldn't have happened. Hollywood, especially in the late 60s and early 70s, was ruthless, polished, calculating, and engineered for control. The idea that someone could just fall into it was unheard of. But Susan, she almost did. At 17, she wasn't acting. She wasn't even trying to. She was a model, one of those fresh-faced teens whose soft smiles and clean lines graced the pages of 17 and Tiger Beat. Her name barely registered in casting circles, but when ABC began developing a new family sitcom inspired loosely by the musical Cowsills, the producers were stuck. They needed someone to play a Laurie Partridge, smart, graceful, magnetic, but untouched by cynicism. Someone who radiated truth, even if she didn't say much. And then someone pointed to a photo in a teen magazine and said, "That's her, no acting classes." No prior roles, not even a single audition reel. Just a look of presence. Susan was flown in, handed sides, and thrown in front of a camera. What happened next wasn't magic. It was terrifying. Those first few days, brutal. She fumbled her lines, missed marks, her voice barely carried. More than once, crew members whispered she might bolt, but she didn't. She watched. She listened. She absorbed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to find rhythm. She studied Shirley Jones. She mirrored David Cassidy's timing, and something shifted. The producers who once doubted her saw it, a strange, silent brilliance, a kind of fragile strength that couldn't be taught. Still, she never seemed comfortable. An assistant director remembered she looked like she didn't want to be there. And maybe she did in single quotes off dash camera. She was elusive. Always in her trailer, rarely joining group lunches. She avoided small talk, avoided gossip, avoided the scene entirely. Many chalked it up to youth. Others, in hindsight, saw something deeper. Girl trying not to drown in a life she never asked for. And yet, when the red light went on, Susan transformed. On screen, Laurie Partridge was sharp, grounded, unshakably poised. Viewers adored her. Letters poured in. She became a sensation overnight. But behind the lens, she remained the mystery. A reluctant celebrity unsure of her place in a world that had suddenly made her its sweetheart. If you watched her on TV, you'd think Susan Dey was calm, incarnate, an oasis of reason among the chaos of her fictional siblings. But the second the cameras stopped, so did that illusion. She was painfully shy, a crew member later admitted. Even off the clock, between takes, she wouldn't join in. She'd smile, maybe nod, then disappear. It was like she wanted to vanish into the walls, unlike her co-stars Denny Bonaduce, always joking. David Cassidy, ever the rock star. Susan recoiled from the spotlight. Public appearances drained her. Interviews made her visibly uncomfortable. Not cold, not rude, just guarded. To her, fame didn't feel like a gift. It felt like exposure. At the time, social anxiety wasn't widely recognized. Silence in a young actress was often mistaken for arrogance, but those closest to her knew better. Susan wasn't being distant. She was protecting something. Her childhood had been shadowed by loss. Her mother died when she was just 8. A wound like that doesn't heal, it hardens. And for Susan, it forged an intense need for control over her emotions, her image, her boundaries. Something nearly impossible to maintain on a TV set. She developed quiet rituals. Arriving early, running lines alone, skipping lunches, always, disappearing between scenes. She didn't gossip, didn't linger. She wasn't rude. She was just elsewhere, like a ghost, one castmate recalled. You look around, and she was just gone, but that stillness, that detachment, it made her performances unforgettable. She didn't overact, she didn't force emotion. She brought a quiet, steely resolve to Laurie Partridge, a kind of emotional gravity that couldn't be faked. She wasn't acting calm, she was calm. And in a town that celebrated noise, Susan Dey became a kind of silent rebellion. But what truly shifted everything, what rewrote her story, was David Cassidy. As the Partridge Family gained momentum, fans started seeing something more in the dynamic between Keith and Laurie. That spark on screen, it wasn't entirely fictional. Susan was still a teenager. David was already a star, and though she never admitted it then, she was drawn to him. He was charismatic, unpredictable, everything she wasn't. Those who knew her said it was obvious. She laughed more when he was near. She went still when he entered a room. For a while, David noticed too. In his memoir, he wrote that Susan had fallen in love with him. He described her as beautiful, smart, and serious, but their timing never aligned. At the height of their fame, nothing happened. But later, after the cameras had stopped, the show had ended, they finally connected. It was the moment Susan had waited for, but for David, it was fleeting. He ended it abruptly, and something in Susan changed forever. A friend later said she was vulnerable with him. It wasn't just a breakup, it was betrayal, and it didn't end privately. In 1994, David Cassidy released a memoir. In it, he shared the details of their relationship. Intimate details, graphic, unsentimental, and entirely public. Susan had never spoken about it, and now there it was for the world to read. She was humiliated, said a producer from one of her later projects. That was the breaking point. Susan never spoke to David again. Never appeared at Partridge Family reunions. Declined every interview that even hinted at those years. The chapter was closed, locked, forgotten by her if not by us. But even as her heart quietly broke, her body was under siege, too. Not from illness, but from expectation. At the height of her fame, Susan was seen as the ideal, flawless, slim, ethereal, but what the world didn't see was the cost. She rarely ate with the cast. She sipped coffee, picked at salads, wardrobe had to constantly adjust her costumes. Whispered concerns circulated. Was she struggling with an eating disorder? No one said it aloud, but everyone noticed. Everyone. In 1972, at just 19, Susan released a teen advice book. On the surface, it was breezy. But hidden in the pages were quiet cries for control, tips on staying slim, appearing confident, masking your flaws. It read more like a survival guide than a diary. Because behind the smile was a girl desperately trying not to disappear. By the mid-1980s, Susan Dey had all but vanished. The teen idol of yesterday, the girl who once couldn't walk down the street without being recognized, had slipped through the cracks of Hollywood. Casting directors assumed she was finished, just another faded face from a bygone era. But then, something unexpected happened. In 1986, producers Stephen Bochco and Terry Louise Fisher were assembling a cast for a new legal drama. L.A. Law would be sharp, bold, and deeply political, and for the role of Grace Van Owen, a district attorney with nerves of steel and a guarded past, they needed more than an actress. They needed presence. Susan Dey's name came up and was almost immediately dismissed. She's the girl from the Partridge Family, one executive reportedly scoffed. She can't carry courtroom gravitas, but then she walked into the room. And just like that, every assumption about Susan Day shattered. What followed wasn't just a comeback. It was a transformation. Gone was the shy girl with the trembling hands and guarded smile. In her place stood a woman who commanded the screen without ever raising her voice. Her portrayal of Grace Van Owen was magnetic, cold when she needed to be, compassionate when it mattered most, every glance, every pause loaded with quiet power. Critics didn't just notice, they couldn't stop talking. She won a Golden Globe, she was nominated for 3 Emmys, and just like that, she wasn't a former teen idol anymore. She was a force, and yet, even then, she kept her distance. A fellow cast member once said Susan had full control of her image. No one told her how to dress, no one told her how to smile. She wasn't playing a character, she was the character. For the first time in her career, she was calling the shots. What made Grace Van Owen so compelling was that she was Susan elegant, intelligent, and quietly fierce. The reinvention was complete, and then she did what no one expected. She walked away, but not before taking one last series of roles that challenged every expectation the public had of her. Long before LA Law, Susan made a curious choice, one that almost no one talks about. In 1981, she starred in Lucre, a sci-fi thriller directed by Michael Crichton. The film was weird, ahead of its time. Dismissed as too strange, but its message alarming. It told the story of digital beauty, manipulated reality, and a media machine obsessed with perfection. Susan played a model caught in a conspiracy that quite literally erased her. Decades later, critics revisited the film and realized Lucre wasn't a flop, it was prophetic. It had predicted the age of CGI influencers, filters, and synthetic beauty long before Instagram was even an idea, and at the center of it, haunting and believable, was Susan Day. She wasn't chasing popularity, she was chasing the truth. Then came Echo Park, a gritty indie film from 1985. Susan played a struggling single mother who turned to stripping to support her son. The character, May, wasn't glamorous. She was raw, desperate, real, and to those who remembered Laurie Partridge, it was jarring. The audience didn't want to see their angel unravel. But Susan, she made them watch anyway. She made people uncomfortable on purpose, one former co-star admitted. She wanted to challenge the idea that beautiful women had to be smiling, soft, agreeable. She broke that, and perhaps that's why her final performance on LA Law felt like a culmination. All the restraint, all the composure, all the pain, tucked just beneath the surface. But even as her career reached new heights, she walked away. In 1988, at the peak of her second rise, Susan Day quietly married Bernard Safransky, a television executive. There was no media frenzy, no cover story, no red carpet debut. It was quiet, deliberate, intimate. And then she disappeared. No scandals, no farewell interviews, no dramatic exit. Just silence. She rejected nearly every public invitation. No interviews, no reunions, not even appearances at award shows unless obligated. Susan Day, one of the most recognized faces of a generation, had ghosted Hollywood. Friends say it wasn't sudden, it was survival. She was tired, said a fellow LA Law castmate. Not just tired of working, tired of being watched, judged, picked apart. She'd been on a screen since she was a teenager. I think she just wanted to be human again. Offers came in, but she declined them. Roles in edgy dramas, guest appearances, even a recurring part on a little HBO show that was just beginning to make waves in the late 90s. A role many actresses would have fought for, but Susan said no because the role was on Sex and the City. According to insiders, producers envisioned her as a powerful New York socialite, a foil to Miranda, maybe even a romantic rival to Samantha. But the character came with a price: bold dialogue, risk scenes, and the exact kind of spectacle Susan had spent her entire life avoiding. She wasn't prudish, said a former agent. She just didn't want to sell herself again. She'd already lived through being ogled and objectified. She wasn't going back, not even for irony. The part never aired. Susan never commented. And the mystery only deepened. To this day, there's no official statement about her retirement. No big goodbye. She just stopped. Turned down every podcast invite, refused every reboot. While her contemporaries chased comebacks, she chose silence. In a culture addicted to nostalgia, that silence became its own legend. The girl who had once smiled on every teen magazine cover, who had captivated audiences without a single acting class, who had stared down fame and turned her back on it, was now completely unreachable. No Instagram, no Twitter, no selfie comebacks. She is, in many ways, the last untouchable star. A living ghost of a time when mystery still existed. People still ask, where is Susan Dey? Some say she lives off the grid, tucked away in a quiet home filled with books, music, and no televisions. Others believe she made a vow to never look back, not after what fame took from her. Whatever the truth is, she's not telling, and maybe that's her greatest role of all. The woman who refused to be consumed by fame, who rewrote her story not with scandal or spectacle, but with silence. She left us with questions, with memories, with reruns and rumors, but she kept one thing to herself: the truth. And in a world that's always watching, always commenting, always asking for more, maybe disappearing is the most powerful thing you can do.